All right, so what you're looking at, believe it or not, is a real human skeleton. And I just want you to take a quick look at this thing because as you do, it's going to look quite a bit different than what you're used to in your health class, right? That's because bones have individual character to them. And what I want to show you is something called spongy bone. And if you look really closely, you can see how on the inside of the bone it looks like a sponge, and that's where you're going to find a lot of red bone marrow. But bone has character to it. It's not just this stale type of rock sitting inside of your body. It is alive and very, very cool.
Back and tells it to contract. Now the lungs are going to be attached to it, so as it contracts, it pulls on the lungs, and that quick influx of air causes you to hiccup. I want to give you a good view of what your internal organs are going to look like. So let's go ahead and move the pec major muscle, the pec minor muscle out of the way, and then I'm going to grab the rib cage or chest plate, and as I move it, we can see the internal organs, such as your liver and diaphragm, your heart and lungs and intestines. But this is what you look like on the inside. Okay, so this is pretty cool. In my hands, I'm holding the right hemisphere of a real human brain. Now, most of what you're looking at, see all this folded stuff? That's called the cerebrum. This thing down here is the cerebellum. Now, the cerebrum is in charge of a lot of different things, but what I want to focus on is this part right here. This is called your frontal lobe or frontal cortex. Now, this, believe it or not, this whole area right there doesn't fully develop until you're 25 years old. And that's where your personality and a lot of your rational decision making are located, or, well, lack thereof. Okay, so here's your cool human fact for the day. Your heart is covered in a connective tissue layer called the pericardium. Now, I'm pulling this to the side, and believe it or not, I can even pull this heart out, and we can see this empty pericardial sac. Now, this would normally be filled with fluid to help reduce all the friction the heart generates as it beats. Okay, so what I have here is half of a real human head, but what I want to focus on is this thing, because this is called the epiglottis, and if you've ever had something go down the wrong tube, this is to blame, because what it's supposed to do is block off your airway so your food or drink can go down the esophagus. But if it fails, then what happens is it goes into your larynx, you cough, and, well, it hurts. So this may seem a little strange, but believe it or not, this is not your stomach. Your stomach is all the way up here, behind the liver. So when you're saying that your stomach hurts, you're really saying your intestines hurt. That's what these are. These are your small intestines, not your stomach. So what I want to focus on today is this area of the central nervous system called the cerebellum. Now, the cerebellum's job, besides looking really cool, is to smooth your muscle movement. So let's say I wanted to wiggle my fingers. That decision would begin up in this area called the motor cortex. Now what would happen is these two structures would communicate with one another to make that movement nice and smooth. Without the cerebellum, I could still move my fingers, but it would be far more disjointed and sloppy. The heart is probably my favorite organ, and there's so many different reasons as to why that's true. But something I want to show you that never ceases to amaze me is just how cool it looks on the inside. Now, if you look and see this white flap thing up top, that's called the mitral valve, and it separates the left atrium from the left ventricle. And what's attached to it are these things called the chordae tendineae. Those are your literal heartstrings. The heart is just the workhorse of the body. This thing beats, on average, 2.5 to 3 billion times over your lifetime. Today I want to talk about what happens when your kidney creates a kidney stone. Now, the kidney's job is to filter urea, a waste product, out of your blood, mix it with water to now be urine, and send it out of your body. But occasionally it forms this little mineral deposit. But little is probably not the right word, because if we look at it compared to the ureter, you can see the problem already. It doesn't fit all that well. And it's this size difference that creates all the problems you've heard of, including immense. Today I want to talk about a muscle that most everyone has heard of, and that's the biceps brachii muscle. Now, the reason why it's called biceps, that means two heads. We have a split. You see, we have two different heads that form one muscle called the biceps brachii. Today I want to talk about appendicitis. Believe it or not, this tiny little thing right here is your appendix. If it gets to be about the size of your index finger, you run the risk of it rupturing. And if that happens, bacteria will make its way into your abdominal cavity and you could go septic. Today I want to talk about how a different perspective can make such a difference when studying human anatomy. What you're looking at here is a mid-sagittal view of one of our cadavers. And this view allows you to see so many different structures all at once, like intervertebral discs, or the pylorus of the stomach, the liver, the ascending aorta. The relationship that organs and tissues have with one another becomes extremely clear when you look at the body from this perspective. It's just so cool. Today I want to talk about your thyroid gland. So the thyroid sits just below your Adam's apple, or thyroid cartilage, and just above your trachea, or your windpipe. So this purple butterfly-looking gland helps regulate your metabolism as well as lower how much calcium is inside of your bloodstream. So what I have here is the skin off one of my cadaver's backs. Now what you can see are like freckles and moles and age spots, but what I want to look at is this cross section of the skin, because what I'm touching here is called the epidermis, but most of what you're seeing is the dermis. Now the epidermis is what sheds and the dermis isn't. So let's say I drew on this skin with like a pen. Well, the reason why that would disappear is because the epidermis flakes. But if I did a tattoo gun, the ink would push down. A question that I get a lot is, what is the difference between muscle tissue and tendons? You see, tendons emerge from muscles. Muscles are normally wrapped in a bunch of connective tissue layers. So as the muscle cells end, the connective tissue layers continue on. And what happens is they then blend with a bone and they cross a joint. So when the proteins of the muscle contract, it ends up pulling on the tendon, which causes a movement to occur. You've probably heard of this structure before. This is called the nasal septum, and what it does is divide the nasal cavity into left and right passageways. Now, it's made of both cartilage and bone, but what can happen is it can start to skew to one side or the other, and we call that a deviated septum. So what they'll do is come in and either remove a portion of this or correct it in a way that opens up the passageway so you can breathe again. I want to talk about the spleen. So the spleen is going to be on the side of the liver and your stomach on your left side. So this doesn't really do it justice. It's much bigger than this. So watch as I kind of pull this thing out. It's about the size of your hand. Like you could fit it in your palm. Now, the spleen is going to have multiple functions. It helps break down red blood cells. It helps store blood in case you lose too much. It's essentially a giant lymph node. But yeah, that's your spleen. It's just going to be hanging out on your left side right by your stomach. Today I want to talk about how your brain has two helmets. You have a hard helmet and a soft helmet. The hard helmet is exactly what you think it is, and it's the skull. And if we look on the inside, you can see where it almost looks like rivers have carved into stone. This is from the meningeal arteries pulsating, and the bone forms around it. Now, the soft helmet is this thing. This is called the dura mater, or mater, and it's a meninge that surrounds your brain. So you could think of it as a soft tissue helmet. Today I want to talk about the lung. Now this is a right lung, and you can see two different colors here, more of a pink and then this discoloration here. The discoloration isn't exactly normal, but overall these are very healthy looking lungs. Now as I pull it out, you see what almost looks like a cut has been made, but that's not a cut. That's showing the different lobes of the lung. And in fact, I can pull the entire thing out and we can see that your lungs are absolutely enormous.